workplace mental health, and workplace mental health awareness, workplace mental health consideration, and workplace mental health actions. And we do that through a combination of research, training, and member-to-member best practice case studies and sharing such as today. And while we typically focus on the employer-to-employee relationship, we do continuously solicit feedback from our members as to what's important for you, what's important for us to talk about, what's important for us to raise awareness. And as you'd expect, the subject that keeps coming up and has kept coming up over the past 2-3 years has been family, it has been children, it's been the gradual convergence of the home place and the workplace. And whereas before, perhaps 2020, the workplace was a physical building that was largely separate to the home, I think what we've all experienced over the past few years is that convergence, the elimination of natural barriers, and that's had, I think, profound implications on work life, but also on family life, and especially during COVID with homeschooling and the elimination of the typical sort of educational environment as well. So just some stats to set the context. Hong Kong, I think many of you will know, has the longest working hours in the world. I certainly feel that sometimes. I'm sure you all do as well. It is a hard-working economy. It is an economy where 58% of the Hong Kong population participates in the workforce. So it is an economy that's driven by family participation in the workforce, and that in itself brings different dynamics to what we see in other parts of the world, particularly around dual working parents, and typically time spent much further away from children than we see perhaps in the West. And as we said, sort of over the past 3 years, I think throughout the world, the impact of the COVID pandemic has been pronounced, particularly in Hong Kong, and then some of the longest working from home and schooling from home periods in the developed world. So all of this has led to increased anxiety, increased uncertainty, increased stress levels for children, and of course for parents. And just to put this into context, right, last year, the suicide rate, children's suicide rate in Hong Kong for kids under the age of 15 reached a record high. So that's 1.7 per 100, which as an actuary we would say is statistically significant. It's statistically significant versus the past, it's statistically significant versus other parts of the world. So this is something which we really do need to tackle. It's something which society, I think, does not talk about enough. It's something which certainly the public sector is not doing enough about, and it's something where we can hopefully do something about to raise awareness and to help our members, to help our employees, to help our friends manage through, and of course to help our children manage through this time. So I'm absolutely delighted that we've launched the toolkit. As Hilika said, please do get the QR code and figure out the technology to download it onto your iPads. Thank you so much to our contributor, Cool Minds. There is an absolute wealth of resource and links and access to information there. So please do use it, please do share it with people who are not here. And I'm delighted to have a panel of experts with me. I'm delighted to have 2 experts, I'd say, and 1 aspiring apprentice to join me. To talk about some of the mental health issues that we see and that they see today being experienced by children and by adolescents, either as working parents, as mental health workers, or as clinicians. But I'll start off with Kim. So start off at a clinical level. So I mean, what are the trends that you're seeing around youth mental health in Hong Kong, and what have you seen in your practice?
Checking. Good. Hello, everyone. This is the first academic year where students have been in school full-time. So to look at a snapshot of this year, it's difficult to say what the trends are because I don't know where things are going. For the last 2 years, everything has been kind of stagnant. So many, obviously, kids online, and what all of this screen time has done to the developing brain in terms of certain kids really thrived with online school, where because the social pressures weren't there anymore and they were kind of left to their own devices. Most children struggled with the lack of social interaction. Because of course, a huge part of growing up is interacting with other people. We learn what's wrong through our interactions with others. Like, you do something and then you see the social reaction, you're like, oh, probably shouldn't have hit that person, right? For a 4-year-old. Right, so it's okay, now I know that's not socially rewarded, I'll change my behavior, right? And learning how to read people's faces, a huge part of what's been missed for so many Hong Kong young people. Even now, in a clinical context, when young people come into therapy, and now obviously I work with families, right? So the family will come in for therapy, and then people take off their masks, but it's a child who wants to keep on their mask. I was like, oh no, you can take your mask off. Like, oh no, it's okay. I prefer having it on. And I always like inquire. I'm like, oh, like what's better about having your mask on? It's like, oh, like I just feel safer. It's like, okay, this idea about safety, right, that now young people are kind of catching on to. And so I used therapy as an opportunity to practice taking off your mask. And one boy took off his mask and was like, oh, like I hate the sound of my voice. Or this one girl was like, oh, but I hate the way my face looks. So now there's a self-consciousness about aesthetic. Because of course, also with online school, you spent 2 years staring at yourself. Because what do most people look at when they're on Zoom? Their own reflection, right? So it's like, and if you're a young person constantly looking at yourself, unlike what is a like typical development where you're looking at others, like learning from others rather than just being self-conscious about how you look. So there's that part, and to be honest, we don't know the effects of everything that's happened over the past 2 years. What we do know is a huge increase in young people's mental health issues. The amount of anxieties and depressive symptoms that young people are dealing with, also because now there's so much access to information, that there is a little bit of an over-pathologization of young people that we need to be mindful of. Because being sad and being stressed doesn't mean you're depressed, right? So where some young people are like, well, I looked up on WebMDB, right? Or WebMD, right? Because young people have access to so much information. So there's that part. But like you said with the statistics, in the last 10 years, youth suicide has over doubled, right? So people are like, oh, but maybe like we're being too dramatic about young people's mental health, and maybe young people aren't really like that sick. I was like, well, like why take the risk, right? Like a young person, if we don't take a young person seriously, there's a really serious risk here, right? And I don't want that on my shoulders, right? In terms of the responsibility when things come into the clinic. So I always err on the side of caution, because the risk just isn't worth it. And young people are taking on so much more information than they've ever had access to. I am constantly humbled by conversations I have with young people. There was an 11-year-old girl I was working with, and she was like, you know, I'm here because I'm supposed to be working on my emotions, but if my mom can't even control her emotions, how am I supposed to control mine? I was like, good point, good point, because we're trying to be better. So I'm really amazed by this new generation of young people who are so incredibly emotionally attuned, aware of what's going on, and taking on so much stress. When I go into schools and talk, the kind of conversations I have with young people as well, they ask me like, oh, what kind of grades do I need to get into university and this, because I'm so worried about not getting a good job. I'm like, you're 14, right? And you're thinking about not being able to get a good job. Like, that's a lot of adult responsibility that people are wearing on their shoulders. So there is this new relationship with stress, and I think when we look at what's happening with social media and the technological pressures that young people have had to adopt to exist in this modern world, like, oh, yeah, it is a different landscape. It is something that we need to pay attention to.
Sort of the hyper-competitiveness of the education system here is a long-standing issue. And then you've got some of these external factors that are new, such as effectively COVID and the impact of technology and other things. So how have you seen it change in the past couple of years? I mean, what are the types of mental health challenges? Has it changed at all, or is it just more?
I think COVID catalyzed everything, right? The issues were always there, because when we look at the statistics of youth mental health, there was always like an increase. If we look at and it's the suicide numbers, right? There was an increase happening anyway, and then COVID catalyzed everything. And I think a big part, obviously, of we're a social species, right? No one gets through life by not talking to anyone, right? We're as rich as our quality of connections with other people. That's how we get through this thing. And what happened with COVID is young people's connection was shot, right? Like people weren't interacting with each other. So that's why I believe, right, there's this big jump in all of a sudden youth anxiety, not feeling good enough. Instead of interacting with people face to face, kids were looking at people online, and in that, the social comparison part of our brain increased exponentially. Now, instead of just comparing yourself to people in the classroom, you're comparing yourself to everyone worldwide. Right, so I think there was that part that added a huge stress on the brain in terms of taking on so much information, and there was no in-person interactions to counter that. So I'd say it's the anxieties and the stress. So for the individual, how that represents in them depends on like if there's a family history of different mental health issues. Also, obviously, a huge increase in paranoia. So behavior that's kind of symptomatic of schizophrenia post-2019 for obvious reasons. There are a lot of youth feeling monitored and a lot of youth feeling like people are listening to our conversations. And so when you sit with people who you're like, well, that is a genuine threat now in Hong Kong, right? And being able to manage what's a mental health issue versus what's an actual real perceived threat. So there's that part too. I don't know if that answers your
No, that's very
question so
helpful.
well.
And I think, and we'll get onto this in a second, but to your point, I don't think we're even beginning to see the effects of 3 years absence of social norms and social interaction on children. I don't think we're beginning to see the manifestation of what that means. So, very, very, I mean, and Nicole, from a mind perspective, does that resonate with what Kim's been saying? Are you seeing the same things?
Absolutely. I have to agree that the social connection part is actually very crucial to the youth development. And so, Cool Minds is actually a joint initiative to targeting, secondary school students, so aged 14 to 24. So I get to speak to a lot of youth in local schools and as well as international schools, and they have been telling us that we are not able to socialize with our friends, like playing basketballs and just going out and have dinner with them, etc. And so that's why they're being stuck at home. And to be very honest, some local school students, they may not be coming from very well resourced families, and so they may be living in smaller household size. And so that's why they are feeling like they're trapped in intergenerational conflicts, and as well as catalyzed by the 2019 kind of the social movement. And so there has been some kind of parental-child conflicts in families, especially local families. And so that's why people they don't know how to seek help, and also they don't know who to talk to for students in local schools as well as in international schools. And because at Cool Minds we used to have a lot of mental health literacy workshops in schools, and I have to say we have seen a drastic increase of seeking help, or an interest from schools to can you do some talks to our students or parents and educators, etc. And so that's something about COVID. That's the only plus side of COVID, that people started to really realize that the importance of mental health, especially for schools, because in secondary schools in Hong Kong there is a policy that you have to have like 2 social workers in schools, but there is only 2 social workers for any size of schools, and so that's why people don't really have the capacity to take care of the youth mental health. And so what we are seeing that the Kelly Support Group has also had conducted research in 2022 and saying that 60% of the youth, they don't seek help. And so that's why, in addition to Kim's points, the low capacity of the public mental health services for adults as well as for youth is actually very an important issue here. And so we want to really increase the help-seeking behaviors of youth. So that's something about taking off the mask, as well as how to not compare yourself with your peers, and as well as how to really stay in harmony with your parents, maybe. So that's something that we want to address.
You raised, I think, a very important point there, which is, we've been saying for years to various public stakeholders in Hong Kong that Hong Kong has a serious supply chain issue when it comes to mental health, right? There's just simply not enough capacity, there's simply not enough counsellors, psychologists, psychiatrists to cope with the level of demand that is inherent, let alone the level of demand that will become more and more residual once awareness spikes. So, and you're right, because we've typically focused on adult treatment rather than what's available for children. Alex, can I just sort of change track quickly and ask, as a working parent, the father of 2 daughters, sort of what have been the challenges you personally experienced over the past few years, and what's been helpful for you from your employer, from your support network, What have you learned effectively?
Yeah, thanks, Ed. Good question. So, I mean, the last 3 years, obviously, goes without saying, have been extremely challenging. That's probably the understatement of the day. I think some of the things that I've learned as a dad, I've really learned more about what behaviour means with certainly my children. I think when I see behaviour, I interpret it as communication, and it took me a little while to realise, but certainly for my eldest, kids aren't perfect, and there's lots of times when she'll do things that I don't think that she should be doing. But almost all of the time, it's her way of communicating because she can't express something. Either she hasn't got the language to express it, or she's got a feeling that she can't process. So being able to identify that really helped, because I completely changed mindset in terms of I didn't think that she's just behaving badly at home whilst Daddy's trying to work on Zoom. What it was is she's not understanding why someone who she loves can't engage with her, and that's really quite a challenging concept for a 4-5-year-old to understand. It's very easy for us because it's like, I'm working, I've got my laptop. You should be working too on school. But so difficult in reality to do. So yeah, I think that really helped, because it then became easier to spot the signs of she needs some support, she needs some help, which is completely understandable when everyone's world's completely changed. And the resilience of children is unparalleled. They are able to cope with a lot. But as Kim rightly pointed out, there are lots of kind of undertones and habits that kids have built up over the last few years, and I think it's I can see a lot with my daughter's friends about what kind of environment her friends have been exposed to over the last 3 years, how good their social skills are, and I think as a parent, if you're recognising that, that's brilliant, because it means that you can actually take some action and do something about it. Parent Toolkit, for a quick plug, is an absolutely fantastic place to start. As a working parent, as I'm sure almost everyone in here will be, I think pre-pandemic, pandemic, post-pandemic, I think the key really for me is not just flexibility, but a little bit of self-compassion, actually, because I know, because I've been there and I've done it, and and I've not been successful. But you try and keep every plate spinning as a parent, and inevitably, when you are so intent on not letting anything drop, usually they all drop, and you're not in a good place. So even now, I actually I try and give myself a bit of space to say, actually, Joe, it's okay. Some plates are going to drop. Whether that's me and I'll put myself out. I wasn't able to. I didn't go swimming last night because my wife needed to go to bed early, and so I needed to do some support with the kids. That's fine. Exercise is important for my mental health. So okay, I've not got to do what I needed to do that day, that week, but that's okay. I'm not going to be too hard on myself. But it's the same. My daughter was a little bit sad this morning that I couldn't take her to school. We had a discussion about it last night, just so she was ready for it, and it wasn't a surprise. And even though it shouldn't have been a surprise this morning, she still acted like it was a surprise. We went through it. We compromised, and but I was later than I wanted to be to come here. But again, I was aware that is very likely going to be an intention. So just try to do little things to soften the blow. But I think for me, just being compassionate to yourself and it's acknowledging that it's okay to not have everything firing on all cylinders, whether it's your work life, your home life, your relationship. But underpinning all of that is communication. So I'm very fortunate that I work for a fantastic employer, and I work for a fantastic boss as well, because I think sometimes it doesn't matter about the company. If you've got a good boss, it's great. If you've got a bad boss, then you probably need a new job. I think just communicating what your intentions are, and whether they're a parent, whether they're not a parent, it's sometimes easier when they are, and I'm very fortunate that my boss is a parent. So they get that I might not be able to do X, Y, and Z, or I might not be able to do A, B, and C because I need to do something with the family. But I think it's too easy to not communicate and just to try and make your problem your own problem and not share that problem. So a meeting needs to be done, a deadline needs to be met. It's quite easy sometimes just to think, I'll just push through. I'll find a way. Whereas just taking a step back and communicating about your needs as well as understanding what the needs are that you've got there, almost 9 times out of 10 there's always a solution, there's always a compromise to be made. So I think communication has been really important as well.
Thanks. I think you raise a very important point, and there's a wonderful metaphor I think in the toolkit which says, when you're on an aeroplane, what the air stewardesses say to you if you're traveling with kids is that if there is extreme turbulence, please fit your oxygen mask first before you fit your children's. And I think the same analogy really applies, right? You've got to look after yourself as a parent. You have to make sure that you are in the right state of mind. So if you don't have awareness over your own mental health and your own challenges, how are you possibly going to assist with your children? So Nicole, speaking of assistant, the question that's always asked is, as a parent, where can I go? Who can I talk to? What is available to me? What are the resources in Hong Kong, public, private? Where are they? So can you maybe just tell everyone here, tell us a bit about Cool Minds. So what is Cool Minds and how can it help?
Right, so Cool Minds is actually a joint initiative, like a project between Mind Hong Kong and Kelly Support Group, and we started in 2019, and because we saw the need to really educate all youth stakeholders, not just students, but their parents as well as teachers in the school setting about mental health. And so in the past 3 years, we have trained a lot of parents, like over 1,400 parents, and we usually tell them, where do you need to go to seek help on behalf of your children or on behalf of yourself? So basically, we do a lot of training, as well as we have a bilingual website. And so we do have a lot of resources written by CPs or clinical professionals for parents and also youth themselves. And so we want to let parents know that if they're finding themselves having a little bit of mental health challenges lately, they can actually also go to talk to the school counselors as well as social workers. And if they're finding difficulties for the children, as I said before, local schools, we have at least 2 social workers. That's a policy under the EDB. But international schools, I have to say, I'm impressed by, for example, HKIS. They have every grade, they have at least 1 clinical professional, I would say. So that's actually very resourceful for international schools. So that's kind of a side point is there's different level of resources for schools in Hong Kong, but there is always help available, and so parents can actually go to counselors as well as school social workers, etc. But we also have public services like integrated family social service centers. So they are called IFSCs, or those kind of integrated service centers for children as well. Parents can actually go to these kind of centers to also seek help on the children's behalf, or just go to these kind of service centers to just check out what kind of activities or services they can do for their own mental health as well as for their children's mental health. So I have actually been working in a placement setting in integrated ICCM, but Integrated Community Center for Mental Wellbeing. So it's actually for aged 12 and up. So basically, if you are youth, you can also go to these kind of service centers. But the sad thing about this in Hong Kong is not a lot of people know about this kind of centers. I don't know how many of you have heard of like ICCMW centers in Hong Kong, because we actually have like 24 centers in Hong Kong. Every district we have at least one. But then the uptake or the service uptake for these kind of service centers is actually very low. So we want to also educate parents that you can actually go to these kind of free services available in Hong Kong, and there's actually a need to really verbalize or promote this kind of service to adults as well. So basically, counselors, psychiatrists, CPs, and also social workers will be the main 4 types of professionals that they can go to, but all of them will usually get mixed up of the roles and responsibilities of these kind of professionals. So hopefully with higher kind of literacy rate among these kind of youth stakeholders, they will know who to talk to for their own best, as well as for their children as well.
So it's quite interesting. The centres are there, utilisation is low. So question for you, and maybe Kim, you can answer as well. What's driving that? Is it an awareness issue with the parent? Is it an awareness issue with the child? Is there a stigma challenge with the parent? Is there a stigma challenge with the child? Is it all of the above? And how do we tackle this?
I can answer first, and then Kim can chip in. I would say it's all of the above. So stigma is actually very important issue here in Hong Kong, that be it self-stigma or stigma from the society. So that's why, for example, for parents in Hong Kong, local parents in Hong Kong, they usually have like this mindset of, in Chinese we call 家丑不外傳. So it's like we acknowledge that we have mental health problems, but we don't want to let people know that we have this kind of problem, because it's not a good thing for people to know. And so that's why the stigma for themselves as well as from the society, saying that, because they don't have this kind of mentality, so their children are bad, something like that. So these kind of stigma will prevent people from seeking help. And so I would say this is the reason of why the youth do not seek help as well. They don't really go to the school social workers. But as well as the parents as well, they don't want to think that the children need help, because they don't want to admit that, there is something wrong, or there's something going on with their children's mental health. So how's
taking the question on a different kind of path though, if we talk about stigma. And so stigma is created when we don't talk about things, right? If something feels taboo, we can't go there. And the more we talk about things, the better it gets. And I think a common misconception with families and parents is like, if I talk about these big scary things, will that make them real for my child? And it's actually like, no, when you give these things a name, and when you talk about it and you're like, this conversation isn't scary, it's like mental health is part of life, the same way like fitness and health is a part of life, right? It's just one of these things where you have to take care of it. And mental health, like all things, on an individual level, ebbs and flows. There are times where each child's mental health is in a good place, times where it's in a worse place, but we talk about it and then we normalize getting help, right? The same way as if you had a cold, you'd go see the GP. It's like, actually, I'm feeling like I need to like sit, digest these feelings, have this difficult conversation, and we see where this goes. But it's very interesting, especially I feel like in Hong Kong culture, where people's children at times are commoditized, right? It's my child who goes to this school, it's my child who's done their, like this, grade 8 piano exam, it's my child that's done this. So to say it's my child who needs mental health support, there's like the shame part where like I'm not a good enough parent, right? Like, so how do I cope with that? And I always tell people when they come to therapy isn't for people who are sick. Therapy is for people who believe that they could be doing better, right? And that's all of us. Right? You don't go to the gym just like, because like, you're borderline clinically obese, I bet it's time to go to the gym now. It's like we don't have to wait for mental health issues to reach a point of fatality before we start taking care of mental health. And it's the same with children, right? If we can normalize a conversation around taking care of your emotions, then we're looking at a preventative model of mental health rather than a reactionary one.
Yeah, that's very, very good point. Communication has come up a few times now, right? The need to be open and transparent about this. And the way that we frame mental health, and we've spoken a few times with some of our members, and particularly HR functions now, starting to think about, rather than framing mental health as a case of, you know, you may be at -5, how do you get back to 0, i.e. framing it from a negative? How do you frame it from a positive, which is you're at 0, how do you get to 5? How do you become a better version of you? And it's something which from a physical health perspective has become normalized over 50 years, but it haven't made that transition yet. So I want to talk about the toolkit briefly. So the toolkit, again, for those of you who haven't had the chance to download the QR code and figure out the technology, it does contain a huge amount of information, tips, links, resources from preschool all the way through tweeners, teenagers, adolescents. So maybe Kim first and then Alex, right? So sort of taking some of the things out of that toolkit. Firstly, what can parents do to start, to recognize triggers or behavioral or thing changes within their children? And once they recognize this, what can they do to support their children?
I think Alex, great parent, by the way, so far, yeah, in terms of how you're talking about what you're noticing, right? And noticing that behavior is communication, right? And so everything that your child does, up until your child is 12, 13, you are on like the same platform as God, right? Like it's you, your partner, and like everything you do is perfect, right? You are the role model and you can't do anything wrong. After 11, 12, completely different story, and we can talk about that, right? The least cool person in the world. But you are the role model, so everything that you do, your child is learning that behavior, and we either imitate or react against, right? So, and sometimes people are like, oh, but my child is just doing like attention-seeking behavior. I was like, well, then they're communicating that they need more attention, right? So we have nothing to lose by giving it to them, but it's how do we choose to give it to them, right? And we want to reward more of the behavior. We give attention to more of the behavior that we want to see, right? So if you notice your child acting out, say what you see, right? Because so many of us, even adults, right, we act in a way and then someone gives us another perspective of how our behavior looks, and all of a sudden our lens widens about who we are. Same for our kids, right? Like, oh, Jenny, I notice you're throwing your toys around. That looks like you're really frustrated, right? It's like, oh, so like mummy notices I'm throwing my toys. 1, I'm seen. 2, this looks like frustration. Jenny, I'm not frustrated. I'm just like, angry that Johnny got more cake than me. It's like, oh, okay. So now we're starting having a conversation. So say what you see, inquire about the behavior, and start that conversation, right? So again, thinking about preventative models, because behavior generally is the best indicator of thoughts, right? Like, I'm staring at the cookies, what am I thinking about? Like eating the cookies, right? So my behavior illustrates what I'm thinking, same with children, and it's getting that conversation going. And so when you notice changes in behavior, so for slightly older children, when their behavior starts to change, get curious about it, right? Also that curiosity tells your child that you're paying attention. The number of children who are like, oh, well, like my parents don't notice me, right? And sometimes, even in the teenage years, where parents are like, oh, but they don't care. Of course they care. Even adults, we care about what our parents think of us, right? Whether we like it or not, right? Whoops, right? It's so that continual communication and the parent-child bond is one of, again, a very big protective factor of good mental health, right? So making sure, don't undermine your role in your child's mental health. Not that you're the whole solution to everything, but that you're a big deal of a big part of the solution. So that part, and then in terms of accessing help, I think checking in with other parents, just seeing what behavior, especially developmentally, like, oh, like, is your child doing this, right? Just to see, because I think, right, again, the shame-based part, right? Mental health issues breed in shame, right? And because we feel ashamed of what's happening, and we feel ashamed of who we are, and then we don't talk about it, and when we don't talk about it, we don't access help, and what could have been something that was taken care of, like, when it was a smaller issue, has now snowballed into something much, much bigger, because we haven't talked about it, and we end up feeling so terrible about ourselves, and we think we're the problem, we're the solution, right? And working on it from that way.
Yeah, thanks, Kim. And Alex, I mean, so normalize it, talk about it. Two things that men typically don't ever talk about are one, mental health, and two, parenting. I mean, does that resonate with you, and how have you broken through those cultural stereotypes?
Massively. I think so. Just recognising what Kim was saying there. Consistency is also key. I remember when I first successfully distracted my eldest when she was not very happy when she was about 2. It's like, oh, look, a huge bird, and all of a sudden, oh wow, and like you think inside, oh, I've nailed it, I've done it, I've got parenting sorted. Nowadays when I say, oh yeah, it's almost like you've been watching us at home, because I notice you are throwing things around. You must be frustrated. It doesn't have the same effect. Like she won't stop. But just the consistency of doing it means that maybe more often than not, we get to okay, what can I do to help you, rather than worrying about getting into an argument or shouting about throwing toys or whatever. So I think that was a big learn for me, just being consistent and just not expecting like something magic to happen like it used to. But yeah, being a dad and being a man from a mental health perspective, not a great combination of things. But I think as well, like just talking to someone is so important. Not just about your own mental health. I mean, I was enlightened when I first spoke about the challenges I've had with mental health, because all of a sudden I realised that actually it's not unique to me. I'm not the only person on this planet that is going through this. Actually, it's quite normal. So I think the same can be said for parenting as well. It might feel like a taboo subject to broach, but I guarantee everyone in this room has got another close family that they'll talk to, close friends that are parents. Just that one step of actually starting to talk about it can make such a massive difference. And what it does is it kind of bridges that perceived bridge to social care, help, support, which sometimes you just think, well, I'm maybe not I'm maybe not ready for that. That just feels like a step too far. But actually, once you just start talking about it with someone, you might find things that you can do. You might feel better about it. You might feel more empowered to think a little bit differently. You might start researching it a bit more, and then it might be natural that you think, well, okay, well actually that felt good, sharing that problem. I really want to try and do more, and that's when it becomes so easy then to employ services of professionals who have got so much more in their toolkit than a close family friend, for example. But I think it all starts with just talking about it. So, from a male point of view, from a dad point of view, just being feeling empowered to just be a little bit more open with people is a huge step forward for not just yours but your family's well-being.
I'm going to ask one last question, then we're going to open up to the audience. So just on a couple of points. I mean, so Kim, you mentioned about how typically children change at about the age of 11, 12. And we've been quite focused in the past 10 minutes talking about younger children and some of the examples. But if we move up the age range, we're looking to sort of the age 12 to 18, where the societal sort of factors are, I think, quite pronounced now in Hong Kong. So for parents with children of that age, again, what are the support services available in Hong Kong? Nicole as well, please answer sort of where can parents go, and are those pathways different to what parents of younger children would go through?
I feel like in terms of resources for where parents go, I feel like you'll be a better person to answer that question.
So there are actually two types of centers in Hong Kong. I would say instead of like private services, parents can also always go to psychiatrists or psychologists for help. But in terms of public services, this is something that a lot of parents don't know, is that there are two types of services. So that's one integrated service center for children and youth. So that's encompassing age range from 6 to 24. So basically, those are the younger children. They will go to these kind of called ICYSC centers, so children and youth centers, with the parents. Usually, parent-child together. They go to the centers and look for social workers or professionals to talk to, have talking therapies, etc. But for the older aged teenagers, for example, the 14 and up, they will usually go to IFSCs, so the family service centers. The parents can also go to with the teenagers, but we all know that teenagers, they don't want to stick with the parents, and so that's why the government has started this kind of the ICCMW centers, the Integrated Community Center for Mental Well-being. So that's actually for the 12 and up. And but sadly, as I said before, the teenagers, they don't really go to those kind of centers for help themselves. And for mental health services, we have to get help from the first person who are experiencing mental health challenges. You cannot go, a parent cannot go to a center and say, "Oh, my child has anxiety. Can you help her?" If her child is not willing to seek help, so that's nothing that the social worker can do as well. And so that's why the best way to do for the children, for example, 6 to 12 or from 12 to 18, I would say is actually usually through the school pathway. So usually the school social workers or school counselors, or better still, psychological professionals. So that's something that the parents can know, that usually these kind of individuals are the first point of contact. Just a very plug for the Mind Hong Kong program, because we know that this is a very low capacity for the public services, and so that's why we're actually training laymen, without professional backgrounds, to receive 100 hours of their ACTs, those kind of talking therapies, acceptance and commitment therapy training, to really place into schools, so that they can do some low-intensity training for children in need. So as to alleviate the burden of school social workers or counselors or CPs in schools. So that's something that we want to normalize, the help-seeking behavior for children as well as for parents, to know that this is something that you can access for your children or for yourself as well.
And then on more of just a therapeutic standpoint, at that age developmentally, right, children are going from being home-oriented to peer-oriented, right? So now all of a sudden, the peer group and the affirmations from there become much, much more important. So, and at that age, right, it's about fitting in, right? I want to fit in. And fitting in is disregarding who you are so a group accepts you, right? And so what the home can offer, which socialization and peers can never do, is celebration of individuality, right? So if you have a young teen or a young person, celebrating what's different about them and making them feel good about the things that their friends won't necessarily make them feel good for, because the worst thing as a teenager is being different, being standing out. And I truly believe, right, healing happens at home. Right? If the home is the protective safe space where the young person goes out, explores different parts of their identity, but they know that they can come home, relax, be themselves, and that's something that's celebrated, that's another protective factor against everything else that this world's going to throw at them. I think it's not, because mental health, right, we don't want to over-therapize children, right? But building up the language, right? So Alex was saying, when behavior is the communication, even adults, right? Sometimes behavior is the communication because adults don't have words. So if we can equip children with an emotional vocabulary at a young age, it's they know what's happening, sad, right? And it's being able to connect the word with the physical embodiment, right? Because emotions are physical experiences, right? You're angry, right? Your heart starts pacing faster, or your hand turns into a fist and you start stomping your feet. So that's why I was like, the labeling of what you see as a parent, like, oh, I can tell you're angry because you're stomping your feet and you're doing this. So like, oh, like that's, I'm experiencing anger. So that way the child can then start labeling the emotions. Like, okay, well, you're angry, so what do you need to do to calm down, right? And then you start building up those resilience skills. So it's not, you know, Jenny, like, if you experience too much anger, right, you might enter like this angry outburst. So it's not lecturing, it's using the here and now and going at the pace that they're at to label what you see and give them the words as they go along their journey. And even when you're upset and you're angry, labeling what's going on with you. Like, and because again, you're the role model and saying things, Mum needs a break, I'm gonna take a break. So then she's like, oh, it's okay to ask for a break in this house. Okay, like, so maybe I'm gonna ask for a break when I'm feeling angry too. Right? And that's why I also tell parents when they're like, oh yeah, it's really bad, like, you know, me and my husband, like, we fought in front of the kids. I was like, oh, like, did you also make up in front of the kids? Like, oh, no, we talked about that afterwards and we made up. So, well, then your child learns how to get angry, but not how to heal that rupture, right? So it's remembering you're the role model and verbalizing what you're going through as and when it happens.
Alex?
There's also some great children's books which just introduce the concept of emotion as well. You know, Bear Feels Kind, Bear Feels Happy, Bear Feels Sad. Love those books. Yeah, they've been useful to talk about it but not talk about it. So just to introduce language and concept.
Thank you, and it's a very important point, and it is in the toolkit. We haven't touched about it today, but actually that correlation between physical health and mental health is the same for children as it is for adults. So, healthy habits, you know, healthy bodies, healthy eating, healthy sleep equals healthy brain and healthy mental development. Final words. You've imparted huge amounts of wisdom, the three of you today. Any final words of wisdom for the audience? Alex?
You're probably all doing great, so don't beat yourself up.
So I would resonate with the airplane analogy. That's what we also tell parents in the workshops as well. Really, there's no shame to to say that I need a break, and also to really talk to your children about mental health. Be it emotional vocabularies. It's just creating shared language that we have like a ritual or a habit to talk about our own mental health. So that's something that parents can enjoy doing with their children as they grow up.
And it's like, yeah, happiness is everyone's right. We all have a right to be happy, rather than, I feel like, especially living in Hong Kong, something that we feel we need to earn. Right? So fight for your happiness and create it yourself.
Thank you. So please join me giving a huge round of applause to our amazing panel. I am a father of three, so I've learned a huge lot today. I wish we'd have had this panel 6 years ago. And I think also remember with City Mental Health Alliance, we are a workplace focused organization. So there are some of you who work in HR. Again, the employer, we haven't touched on it today, but the employer has a huge role to play in a workplace economy like Hong Kong to provide more benefits, more services, more support to working parents. And final comment from me, as I said several times, please get the QR code, please share it, and please continue to support the Alliance. Thank you very much. We're going to have free coffees, so please feel free to chit-chat, share notes, compare stories. So thank you. Dotze.